Hey everybody, this is week 5's lesson video cast. So I've posted the instructions for your homework for next week. It's all right here. I've given you a link here and also here to download the source files for the projects we're going to be working on. So go ahead and log in and click on that to download it. Okay. So it should, the file that downloads should say visc102-week5.zip. When you double click on it, it should open or create a folder titled week 5. So open that, and we've got a few pictures. We've got model 1, model 2, this old photo, some photo paper, and this little Photoshop action file. So let's start off by opening the old pic. So right click on it, open with Photoshop. Okay. So you notice there's quite a few things that make this picture look old. It's got torn edges, it's got tears, it's worn away, it's got spots all over the place, the picture is faded, it's got this sort of sepia tone, and it's kind of faded, so all kinds of things happening to it. So we're going to go through a number of steps to fix it up. So let's get started. Go ahead and open up the layers palette, and you should have your background layer. The first technique we're going to use is the stamp clone tool. So and we did this before with that photo with Kristen where she's standing in the field and we had to fill in those trees. That was using the stamp clone tool. So you can access it right here. Make sure you don't have the pattern stamp tool. You can also access it by pressing S. So the way this works is, I'm going to zoom in. You hold Option and click, and that's going to set your sample area, and then when you click and drag, it's pulling from that sample. Now an issue a lot of people have is, let's say they'll sample from here and they're going to be filling it here. As you move up, you're going to be like, wait, what's going on here? Well, what it's doing is it's actually pulling. As soon as you click and hold, it's going to be aligned, like, so basically we're taking the sample spot. As soon as we start clicking, if we move up here, it's moving up from that sample spot. So if your sample spot is right here and you click and move up, it's going to start sampling all the spots that are above your sample area. So you need to be careful of that. The other thing is just make sure to do lots of samples. So instead of just sampling one area and then just paint, that's not a very good way to do it. You'll want to sample, do a little painting, sample, do some painting, sample, painting, sample, painting. Before I go any further, you'll probably will have noticed that I'm doing something very bad, and that's modifying my original layer. So you don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo all that. So what you want to do is create a brand new layer, empty layer. Just click the new layer icon and double click on its name, and you can rename it. So I'm just going to call it clean up or something, and just hit return when you're done. Now some people have had this issue where they'll sample and then they'll start drawing and nothing happens, and that's because under the sample you've got to select current and below, because we're on this layer right now and there's nothing to sample from. So if you're trying to sample from that layer, you're not going to paint anything. So you've got to sample from this layer as well as all the layers below it. So now that I've got that checked, it should start working. And you'll notice if I turn off this bottom layer, this is all that's on this cleanup layer. So it pulled from the bottom layer and is painting it onto this top layer. So you can just keep doing that. By the way, I'm using a really rough brush. You can right click while you're in the brush tool and you'll see all kinds of brushes to pick from. Yours might not look like this. If it doesn't look like this, there's a little arrow in the upper right. Click on that and choose Stroke Thumbnail, and that will get you this view. So I've chosen something more rough, like one of these, and since this texture or this pattern that I'm sampling is kind of rough, this is gonna work a little better and not be so obvious. So I'm just sampling and painting, sampling and painting. But you might notice it sort of gets this sort of pattern looking effect going, which is not the best. So there are some other options besides the stamp tool. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this layer off. I'm going to duplicate this layer, so I'm going to select it. And there's always a few ways to do everything. So one way to do it is to click and drag to the new layer icon, and that makes a copy. The other way is to just hit Command J. It all depends on what your preference is. So I like hitting Command J because that's faster. The reason I'm duplicating that layer is with this next tool I'm going to show you, which is the patch tool, which is right here. If you don't see the patch tool, if you see a band-aid or an eye, you need to click and hold on it and select the patch tool. You can also press J to access it. The way this works is sort of like a lasso tool. You make a selection, and once it's dotted, move over top of it and just drag it to an area you want to sample it with or replace it with. And as soon as you let go, and I'm just going to click just to deselect, it blends it in perfectly. It looks really nice. So you can keep doing that. So sample that area, drag, sample that area, drag. And I personally think this does a much better job than the stamp tool. The only problem with this is, you see at the top, it doesn't have any way of sampling from layers below it. So that's why I have to duplicate the bottom layer. So that's one thing, I don't know, I think Adobe Photoshop should do better. I don't know why it doesn't do it, but that's just the way it is. So you've got to duplicate this layer. You can't just create a blank layer. If I did create a blank layer, so create a new blank layer, and I try doing it, it's going to give me this warning. Could not use the patch tool because the selected area is empty. So you've got to have something to drag. So let's just continue doing that. And again, give me that warning because I didn't deselect this layer. So I'm still highlighted on this empty layer. I've got to click on that one. Now, there are some trouble areas, like where you have a border here. There's a couple ways to solve that. One is to switch to the polygonal lasso tool. You can also access that with the L. What you can do is click along the edges and but the thing is, you can't use the patch tool with this. You can only use the stamp tool in this case. So I'm going to go up to my cleanup layer, turn it on, make sure it's selected. I'm going to press S to switch to my stamp tool. I'm going to sample, and I'm going to paint right along the edge. And sample again, paint along the edge, and I got a little sloppy there, so I'm going to undo it. But you'll notice once I deselect, go to select, deselect, it kept my clean edge. If I didn't have that selection, if I sampled, it would, you know, mess up my edge. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is I'm going to turn this cleanup layer on. I'm going to erase some of this. All right, switch to the stamp tool, press the S key, hold Option, click right on the edge. Now when you move your stamp around, you'll see it gives you this little preview. So that's to help me align it up. So I'm going to get it so this is right on the border and start clicking. And I can do that with this edge as well. So notice there's no grunge in this spot. I'm going to sample, move it down, and paint. And let's say I want to get rid of this brown spot right there. I'm going to click on the edge to sample it, and then I'm going to move it right up to here, make sure it's aligned, and there you go. So I think that's actually better than using the lasso tool, but you know, it's really up to you and what you think the situation calls for. So you can also do that with the patch tool. So I turned off this top layer. I'm on my second layer where I've been doing patchwork. I'm going to press J to switch to my patch tool. You can do the same thing. So I'm going to grab this little tear and I'm going to drag it to the left and let go, and voila. It did get a little bumpy right here, so I'm just going to select the top first. I'm sorry, did the wrong part. I'm going to select that part and drag that over to here. Now it's a little more aligned. So again, for this brown spot, I would select it and just drag up. And there you go. So for more like detailed areas, you'll want to use smaller samples. So for example, maybe right here, I'm going to press J, select that, and again, forgot to switch to this layer, so click on that layer, drag it, let go. And also you notice it got a little foggy right here, and sometimes the patch tool will do that if it's next to an edge. Like I'll show you. If I'm like right along this edge, what happened? Oh, I undid my layer select. So if I drag it to here or something, it's going to start to like blend in a bit. I don't know, maybe that's a bad example, but you will notice that sometimes. So when you do your patch tool, you'll want to like sort of, you know, something's going on where it keeps deselecting that layer. Huh. Well, yeah. Yeah, so for smaller areas like that, just make smaller samples. And here we sort of want this, I don't even know what this is, but just grab that, drag it up. So that's the basic concept. And this could become kind of tedious, but it's also sort of therapeutic. So yeah, I would just go through and continue using that same technique for this whole image. I'm going to go ahead and skip on to the next step, but I'm assuming you're gonna do all the cleaning up work. So if you want, you can just hit pause and finish cleaning up, and then once you've done that, hit play again and move on to the next steps. So next thing we want to do is I'm just going to make it straight black and white. I'm going to get rid of the sepia tone. So under the adjustments panel, select this one, hue and saturation. Turn the saturation down so it's all black and white. I'm going to click this back arrow. Now I want to increase the contrast a bit, so there's 3 ways to do it. You can do brightness contrast, so I'm going to do that one. Increase the contrast, but that's as far as I can take it, so that's sort of a disadvantage to this tool, so I'm actually going to trash it. So click that trash button. I'm going to click the back arrow again. You can try levels, so I'm going to drag that arrow up and drag that arrow back, but I don't want to do it too far or else it's going to start washing out parts of my image like here. So I'm going to drag it back a bit, and that does a pretty good job. I'm going to trash that, or you can do the curves tool. So click anywhere on this line and drag it so you think it's appropriate. So we want some sort of true blacks, so like right in here or around here or in here, we want it to get almost to pure black. And just to lighten up the rest of the image, click somewhere around here, lighten it up. So just to compare before, after, gives a lot more clarity. And the great thing about having these as adjustment layers is you can go back here and continue editing. So I'm going to click this. Now, one problem some people have had is, like, let's say you have this layer that you've been doing your stamp tool with. You'll notice like these brown spots everywhere, and that's just because these adjustment layers are below this layer, so you'll need to click them, so shift select them and drag them up to the top, and that's going to affect everything below it. But we don't want this layer anyway, so we're just going to turn it off. Yeah, and then hue and saturation. The reason I have you do the make it black and white before adding these, increasing the contrast, is because if you don't make it black and white, it makes it, I don't know, I think it intensifies the oldness of it. So I think making it black and white sort of lessens that a bit. There is one other cleanup method that you can use, and this, you really need to use it sparingly. You can't go crazy with it or else it's not going to make your image look good. But create a new blank layer and set it to darken. Now we're just going to use the brush tool. And what darken does is it only affects colors that are lighter than the color you're painting with. And just to explain that, hold down Option to select this color. Actually, let's select the little lighter color. When I paint over this, let's see, why did that happen? Oh, because I have my adjustment layers on. You want to make sure these are turned off, or else it's going to intensify the effects. So make sure your above layers are off. So I'm going to sample from here and paint. And you notice when I paint on this dark spot, right now I'm clicking, it's not making it the same color as what I painted it with. It's only affecting the colors that are lighter. So I'm going to select here and click. So click here. So that's another method, but it's not perfect. but I don't know. It's there if you want to use it. So I'm going to turn that off. So we've cleaned it up a bit, make it black and white, add some contrast. Next thing we can do is sharpen it up. So select that top layer, right click on it and convert it to a smart object. And what that's going to do is make it so even though you apply effects to it and resize it, it's going to retain the original image. And I'll show you what I mean. So now that it's a smart object, I'm going to go up to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. Now if I just did Sharpen, it would apply one sharpen pass to it. So I'll do it again. Filter, and also a tip is the last filter that you used is going to show up at the top of your filter menu. So, or you can press Command F to reapply a filter. So I'm going to keep hitting Command F. So you'll notice all these sharpens are stacking up here. I can go in and turn them back off. But the thing with sharpen is you don't really have any options. It just applies a sharpen of a certain amount and that's it. So I think that's kind of limiting. So I'm gonna delete these filters. So I'm just right clicking, selecting delete smart filter. Oops. So if I go to filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, that gives me a lot more options. I can increase the amount. I can also change the radius. And the radius is sort of how broad the sharpening effect is. It's a little hard to explain, but or I guess how precise the sharpen is. So if I put it way up here, it's not going to be very precise. If I put it all the way down, you can't see anything. So I want it about maybe 3 pixels or so. You notice here, this isn't black and white, and that's because it's only showing the layer that I'm working on. It's not applying all these above effects to it. So I'm going to hit OK. An awesome thing about smart objects is you can go back, double click on your filter you just applied and make adjustments. The other awesome thing is it has a mask right here which applies to the effects. So if I switch to a brush tool, make it big, make sure I have a black color selected, I'm going to paint over it and it's going to undo the sharpening. Now, we really don't want to sharpen these areas with just, solid colors, or solid tones. We really only want to sharpen the detailed areas. So what we should do is fill the entire mask with black, just to hide the effect, but then use a white brush to paint on the mask to reveal the filter in the areas we want it. So just to explain, edit fill, foreground color. This whole semester I've been saying hit Option Delete, but a lot of people can't remember that. So another way to do it is to go to Edit, Fill, and then choose foreground color, or you can just select a color. I personally think that just takes way too long, but for people that don't like using hotkeys, that's there for you guys. So hit OK, and you notice the sharpening went away and my thumbnail right here is black. So I'm going to switch to a white color by pressing X. You notice I have a foreground and a background color. Pressing X is going to switch those, or you can click this arrow. So I want white. I'm going to paint on the areas I want more detail on. So this scarf right here, you notice it's getting sharp only on the areas I'm painting on, which is a lot of control. So maybe on his face, just bring out those features. This stick right here, his collar, the hands. And remember, you can use the bracket keys to make your brush bigger and smaller. You don't have to be stuck using a little tiny brush. You can make things a lot bigger. Now, we're doing all this assuming you've already cleaned up your image. But let's say you're doing your sharpening and you notice, oh, I've still got some grunge that I want to clean up. If you try to use the patch tool and try to clean that up, it's going to give you a no sign. See that little cross out? That's because it's a smart object and it's protected from any kind of editing. But the way you edit it is double click on it on the layer, and it's going to give you this dialog, hit OK. And this is that layer in its own document. So I'm going to go in and clean up right here. And here. And here. Okay, and then I hit save, Command S. Now when I close it, you can either do File, Close, or Command W. Now you notice those changes have been made, but I still have my smart object. So you can make edits to it so as long as you open it up in a new document. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. So and you can turn on your adjustment layers or your filters on your smart object with these eyeballs. So turn that off, turn it back on. So we've applied a sharpen, we've masked it, we have a hue and saturation to make it black and white. We've added curves to make it more contrasty. And we've used the patch tool to clean up a lot of the spots. The last thing we should do is crop it off. Since, you know, this white border is already kind of uneven and we've got these tears and stuff, let's just crop it to only the image. So like most things in Photoshop, there's several ways to do it. You can select this rectangular marquee, or M is the hotkey. Start in the top left corner, drag down to the bottom right corner, and then go to Image, Crop, Shunk, and then you can deselect it by pressing Command D or deselecting. And we still got a little bit right here, so you can either fill that in with the stamp tool, or we can just crop it again. So click here, go to here, and I can even drag it over and image, crop. All right, so if you hold Option and click on the bottom layer, that's going to isolate it by itself on the eyeball of the bottom layer. So before, after. And again, I didn't really do all the cleaning up, but I like doing this just to sort of compare the before and afters. So that's cleaning up an old photo. So for you guys, you'll want to go ahead and double click on your smart object and finish cleaning it up. Also, one thing you'll notice is when we double click on it, it didn't crop it. And that's because, again, it's preserving it. It's not letting it be affected. So that's another cool feature. Okay, so we can close that and you can save it. You probably will, since there's a little more time consuming. So it's thinking. So I'm just going to save it. Okay, the next thing we want to do is take a new photo and make it look old. So make it look like, take this, which looks like it could have been taken any time between the 60s and now. We want to make it look like it was shot in the early 1900s. So we're going to be combining this image with this old photo paper. And also, I'm going to tell you guys about actions. So let's go ahead and open this image, Model 2, open with Photoshop. All right, so let's see, I'm going to skip like repeating these steps. I'm just going to go ahead and start with recording an action. So what actions do, and if you don't see this icon here or see this list, you need to go into Window and select Actions. What actions are pre-recorded Photoshop processes. So let's say you wanted to, which is what we're, if you want to like add a noise layer, make it sepia, and blur it and all this stuff, you can do all that by recording it, and then later on, if you don't want to have to go through all those steps again, you'll have your action. Like, see, I have one called add noise, or noise layer, sorry. I tell it to make a blank layer and then add noise. Or I have another called vignette, where I make a layer, add a gradient, all this. So these are a series of steps that are all bundled up into one package. So in fact, I'll just show you some. These are ones I've downloaded. There's this one, let's see, I'm going to expand this a bit. Sun exposure. I'm going to click that, press play, and it applies this effect to it. Or Smart BW does all that. The thing I don't like about these ones that this guy created is he doesn't do it with adjustment layers. He actually applies all those things to the original image. So that's like a bad practice. So we're going to be creating our own. So what you can do is you can create your own folder. So I created one called John's. So just click that folder icon, give it a set name. So I'll just call this VISC 102. Okay, so to start recording, just hit the new icon. And this one we're going to call Make Old, or whatever you want. Hit record. You notice this button turns red and is depressed. And that means everything that we do from this point on, it's going to be keeping track of. And as soon as we hit stop, it's going to save that all into one action. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is create a new noise layer. So I'm going to hold Option and click on the new layer icon. I'm going to title it Noise. For the mode, I'm going to set it to Soft Light and check that box to fill it with 50% gray. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll notice here on the action, if I spin it down, it recorded what I did. So it says name it noise. set it to soft light, and fill it with neutral color. So it just recorded that action. Next thing I want to do is add the noise filter to it. So with it selected, go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. And I'm going to crank it up so you can really see it on her. So it's pretty apparent by now. And actually you can make it go beyond what you really want, because we can always go back and turn this layer down. So I'm going to hit OK. Next I want to make it sepia. So I'm going to go to the Adjustments panel, click Hue and Saturation, and there's a couple things I can do. I can turn the saturation all the way down so it's just black and white, or I can check this box for colorize, and that's going to make it sepia. So I can drag it to whatever color I want. In this case I want it to be sort of brown, brownish yellow, so about there. Adjust the saturation to where I want it, and that's it. And you'll notice right here it says make adjustment layer, and it says, that's funny because I set it with, so I don't know. So it recorded that action. The next thing I want to do is select my background layer, and you notice it says select layer background. Right click on it, convert it to a smart object. You see, added it to the list. Now I want to add a blur filter. So go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I want it just blurry enough to make it look kind of old. So right about there, hit OK. You added it here. It remembered the settings. And now let's hit stop. Now, one thing you need to remember is if you have it set to record and you go in and do a bunch of other stuff like, I don't know, mess with the channels or do some other things but decide you don't want them, it's going to be recording all those things. So if you end up recording a bunch of other stuff you don't want, so in fact I'm going to go in, click record. You can actually edit your action. So I hit the record button. Let's say I go in here and I want to add a photo filter. I'm going to change the color to like, I don't know, blue or something. And it's not affecting it because it's below that adjustment layer. So I'm going to drag it up. All that stuff is being recorded. So you don't want that. So if you got a bunch of unnecessary steps that are messing up your playback, go ahead and trash those steps. So I don't want to move that layer. I don't want to do that. And which adjustment was this? Yeah, I don't want this, so I'm going to delete that. All right, so now that my make old action is recorded, I'm going to undo everything and I'm going to hit play. Let's see if it works. And in a matter of seconds, it redid all that work that took several minutes. So very cool. All right, so the last thing I want to do to this photo is put it on this old photo paper. So open that in Photoshop. Press Command A to select it all, or if you don't like hotkeys, select, choose all. And edit copy or press Command C. You can go ahead and close it at that point, and then edit paste or Command V. And if you're in Windows, it's going to be Control V and Control C and so on. Okay, so I'm going to hide that. So you notice it's a little smaller than the image and it looks really grainy. That's because it's below my noise layer. So I'm going to drag it up to the top. Now it looks, you can see a little clearer. Next thing I want to do is blow it up to fit the entire screen. But before I do that, I want to make sure it's a smart object, and I'm going to explain why. If you hit Command T, that puts it into transform mode, so you can do all kinds of stuff with it. You can scale it, or if you right click on it, you have a bunch of other options like distort. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And once you're done doing all that, and you can rotate it, whatever you want. Flip it horizontally, hit enter. Now, I didn't turn it into a smart object, so now if I want it back the way it was, there's not much I can do to fix that. The other thing is, if you hit Command T, if you scale something down and hit enter, and then later on you decide you want it big again, so I'm going to hit Control T. If I scale it back up, it's going to look really blurry. So that's really bad. So that's why we convert it to a smart object, and then we do our adjustments. So go ahead and hold Shift and drag the corners up. If you don't hold Shift, it's gonna not keep your proportions. So hold Shift and it'll keep it proportional. And since it doesn't quite match up, you can get it to about here and then stretch it just a little bit. Go and hit enter. All right. Well, we can't see her anymore. Let's set that to photo paper. What we need to do is change the layer type. So I'm going to set it to multiply, and voila. It now looks like she is actually on this paper, which is really cool. So yeah, and if you want, you can add like additional noises and stuff, but well, let me just try something real quick. Oops. I'm just experimenting, so don't worry. Didn't quite get the look I was going for. Yeah, what I was trying to do is make it sort of accentuate those rips. So here's without it, here's with, but I guess it's not really working. So you can just ignore that last step I did. But that's essentially what you do to make something look old. So you can go ahead and save that. So now for your homework, I want you to do that exact same process, but to one of your own photos. So here's another photo I have. And remember, we recorded our actions. So you can go to Action, click Play. Does all those first steps for us, but you notice it's really extreme. So, but the good thing is you can select the noise layer and turn the opacity down. And then you can double click on the Gaussian blur filter and turn that down. And if you don't like how the hue and saturation looks, double click on that and turn the saturation down, or do whatever. See, that's why it's so important to preserve your original layer and have all these things as modifiers, is you can always go back and adjust things afterwards. So we did all that, and then the last step is just to add the photo paper. So I'm going to open that in Photoshop. Command A, Command C, close it, Command V, and this time it's a lot bigger than the photo. So I'm going to right click on it, convert to Smart Object, and when I hit Command T, you'll see it goes beyond the photo. So just Shift, drag, and you can squish it a little bit. Hit Enter, set it to multiply, and voila. I would turn the noise down just a bit more. And in fact, I would probably fade it a bit because you notice it's really contrasty. So select your bottom layer, go to Adjustments, and actually, you know what? We can do this with our hue and saturation layer. So double click it, turn the lightness up, and that's going to fade your photo even more. So there you have it. Save it, and we can do that with the our other picture too. So go into your layers, double click on hue and saturation, and lighten it up. Now it looks really old. So so there you have it. Your homework is to take this old photo and touch it up completely. So get rid of every bit of grunge that's on there, get rid of all the tears, make it nice and contrasty. So make it look better than this. And your other homework is to take one of your own photos, either something you've taken or something you find on the internet, and make it look like an old photo. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Email me if you have questions.